The air in Las Vegas always hummed with a restless energy, a million untold stories swirling around the neon lights. For Elvis Presley, it was a second home, a gilded cage he sometimes loved, sometimes resented. Tonight, after a blistering show that had left the audience screaming for more, he felt a familiar exhaustion settle deep in his bones, a weariness that went beyond tired muscles. He was the king, yes, but even kings got tired of wearing the crown. Colonel Parker, his manager, was already buzzing about the next movie deal, the next tour, the next million-dollar opportunity. Elvis just nodded, smiled, and tried to remember what it felt like to not be Elvis. Sometimes he missed the boy from Tupelo, the one who just loved to sing, not the legend who had to perform. It was during a late-night charity event, one of the many engagements Parker insisted upon, that he met her. The room was loud, filled with the clinking of glasses and the forced laughter of the rich and famous. Elvis had been cornered by a group of insistent socialites. When he spotted her tucked away in a quiet corner, she wasn't glamorous or flashy. Her dress was simple, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. What caught his eye was her stillness, a calmness in the chaos. She wasn't trying to get his attention, which ironically made her the most interesting person in the room. He excused himself, much to the socialite's annoyance, and drifted towards her. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. When she looked at him, it wasn't with awe or excitement, but with a deep, quiet knowing. "Mind if I join you?" Elvis asked, his voice smooth, practiced. She offered a small, gentle smile. "Only if you truly wish to, Mr. Presley. Most people approach me out of curiosity, not genuine interest." Elvis chuckled, leaning against a wall beside her. "Well, I'm curious, I suppose. But also, you look like you've got a good story or two to tell." "Stories are everywhere," she replied, her gaze sweeping the room, "especially in the hearts of men." She paused, then her eyes settled on him again, a little more intently this time. "You carry a great song within you, Mr. Presley. A powerful melody that lifts the souls of many." Elvis felt a flicker of surprise. This wasn't the usual flattery. "You're a fan, then?" "I appreciate beauty wherever I find it, and your voice. It is a rare gift, but gifts, like all things, can be fragile." A strange chill ran down his spine. He'd heard she was a psychic, one of those people who claimed to see things others couldn't. He'd always dismissed it as hocus pocus, but there was something in her gaze that felt different, fragile, he prompted. A hint of unease in his tone. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper barely audible above the din. The voice. "Elvis, the very thing that lifts you highest will cast the longest shadow. A silence will fall, a profound and chilling stillness when it comes. Find the song within, not the sound without, or you will be lost." Elvis felt a sudden tightness in his throat, a bizarre sensation. He cleared it. "What do you mean, silence?" "Like I'll lose my voice." He tried to laugh it off, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked past him as if seeing something far away. "The greatest fear is not failure, but the loss of what defines you. But sometimes what defines you isn't what you think it is." She turned back to him, her eyes softening. "Be wary, Elvis. The silence will come and it will be terrifying, but within it a different kind of music can be found if you are brave enough to listen." Just then, Colonel Parker bustled over, his face red with a mix of triumph and annoyance. "Elvis, there you are. Come on." "Son, Mr. Henderson from the studio wants a word about that new script." Elvis looked back at the woman. She gave him another small, knowing smile, then gracefully slipped away into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as she'd appeared. He stood there for a moment, the psychic's words echoing in his mind. The voice. A silence. With all terrifying, find the song within's Rofarai. Grydenes tenting ear. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the strange encounter. Must be tired. Too many late nights, too many shows. He was Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll. His voice was his power. He forced a smile for Parker and let himself be pulled away. But the chilling whisper of the psychic's warning lingered like a cold shadow in the vibrant, noisy room. He might have dismissed it, but he couldn't quite forget it. Not entirely. Life, as always, moved at a dizzying pace. For Elvis, after the charity event, it was a blur of concerts, recording sessions, and movie sets. The psychic's words faded into the background. Noise of his fame replaced by roaring crowds and the constant demands of his career. He was on top of the world, seemingly unstoppable. Yet sometimes, in the quiet moments between takes or late at night when he couldn't sleep at Graceland, the memory of her warning would resurface. He'd find himself unconsciously clearing his throat or testing a high note in the shower, just to reassure himself. His voice was fine, of course. Perfect. Stronger than ever. But then, tiny cracks began to appear almost imperceptibly at first. During a grueling recording session, he found himself struggling with a note he'd usually nail with ease. It wasn't a huge problem, just a slight tremor, a whisper of a crack that the sound engineers easily fixed. He blamed it on the Vegas dry air or perhaps too many late nights. "Just a bit of strain, Elvis," Colonel Parker said, patting him on the back. "You're working hard, son. Need to rest that golden throat." Elvis nodded, but a seed of doubt had been planted. He found himself scrutinizing his own performances, listening for imperfections. He began to feel a slight tightness in his throat, more often a subtle irritation that no amount of tea or lozenges seemed to soothe. Sometimes during a show, he'd reach for a note and it felt like it just wasn't there the way it used to be. Not that he missed it, not really, but it was just a fraction harder to hit, to sustain. He started pushing himself harder, working out more, trying to physically force his voice to be as powerful as it always had been. He'd sing extra takes in the studio just to prove to himself he could still do it. The more he pushed, the more he felt this subtle resistance. Like his voice was a wild horse that was beginning to bridle. One evening back at Graceland, he was sitting with Priscilla in the living room. She was looking through a fan magazine, smiling at an old photo of him. He watched her, appreciating the simple beauty of the moment. "You okay, honey?" Priscilla asked, sensing his quietness. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, just tired, I guess. It's a lot, you know. The touring, the movies, the expectations." Priscilla put the magazine down and took his hand. "You're the king, Elvis. Everyone expects you to be amazing." "That's just it," he said, looking out the window at the sprawling grounds of Graceland lit up like a fairyland. Sometimes I feel like I'm wearing a costume, like I'm not really myself. I'm just Elvis Presley, the product." He paused, then confessed. "And lately, my voice, it feels a little off. Like it's not as strong as it used to be." Priscilla squeezed his hand. "Oh, Elvis, you're just tired. You've been working non-stop. Take a break. You probably just need to rest your voice." He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe it was just fatigue, just the wear and tear of a demanding career. But the memory of the psychic's words, "The voice of silence will fall," would resurface, a cold whisper in the back of his mind. He'd dismiss it as superstition. But the seed of doubt had taken root. He began to feel isolated even with Priscilla by his side. The more he thought about the voice, the more he felt detached from it. It was his greatest gift. Yes, but it also felt like a burden. It was what everyone wanted. From him, what defined him? What would he be without it? The thought was terrifying. He was a singer. He was Elvis. Colonel Parker announced a major new residency in Las Vegas, the biggest one yet, with more shows and higher stakes. "This is it, Elvis," Parker boomed. "The grandest show the world has ever seen. You'll solidify your legend forever." Elvis managed a weak smile. He felt a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. The Vegas air, the demanding schedule, the immense pressure. He had to be perfect, more than perfect. He had to be phenomenal. He had to prove to himself and to the world that the king still reigned supreme, but deep down a cold dread began to grow. The psychic's words played on an endless loop. The voice, a silence, will fall terrifying. He tried to shake it off, to focus on the roaring applause he knew was coming. But for the first time in his life, Elvis Presley, the man who was music, felt a shiver of fear every time he thought about opening his mouth to sing. The weeks leading up to the new Las Vegas residency were a blur of frenetic activity. Elvis was pushing himself harder than ever. Rehearsals stretched late into the night, followed by costume fittings, interviews, and endless meetings with Colonel Parker. Every aspect of the show had to be perfect. The stage design was extravagant, the band tighter than ever, the set list carefully creepy to showcase his incredible range and power. Elvis felt a constant ache in his throat, a raw, scratchy sensation that lingered despite all the remedies he tried. He drank gallons of herbal tea, took focal rest whenever possible, and even consulted a specialist doctor. The doctor found nothing physically wrong, no nodules, no infections. "Just a bit of vocal fatigue, Mr. Presley," the doctor had said, reassuringly. "You're working your voice hard. Take it easy." But Elvis couldn't take it easy. The weight of expectation was immense. This wasn't just another show. It was meant to be the definitive Elvis experience, cementing his legacy. Colonel Parker was a constant presence, his jovial manner barely hiding the intense pressure he exerted. "Think of the millions, Elvis. Think of the history we're making." Elvis would nod, plastering on his famous confident smile. But inside a growing unease festered. He knew his voice, he knew its power, its nuance, and he felt a disconnect. It was like driving a powerful car, but the steering felt a little loose, the brakes not quite as responsive. He could still make it go, but it wasn't the effortless glide it used to be. During rehearsals, he'd occasionally falter on a high note, or his voice would crack unexpectedly. The band members, ever loyal, would pretend not to notice, or attribute it to him being tired. But Elvis noticed. He felt it deep in his chest, a growing fear that he was losing control of the very instrument that defined him. The psychic's warning became a chilling mantra in his head. The voice, "A silence will fall." He'd wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of trying to sing, but no sound coming out. He'd shake his head, telling himself it was just stress, just nerves. Every performer got nerves. He confided in Priscilla, who was his rock. "I feel like I'm losing it, honey," he admitted one night, his voice raw with exhaustion and fear. "My voice, it just doesn't feel right. It's like it's not mine anymore." Priscilla hugged him tightly. "Of course it's yours, Elvis. You're just exhausted. You're pushing yourself too hard. Maybe you should take a break. Postpone the opening." He shook his head vehemently. "No, I can't. Parker would have a fit. And what would the fans think? The media? No, I have to do this. I have to be the king." He started to avoid singing for pleasure, only performing when absolutely necessary. The joy he once felt in music began to erode, replaced by anxiety. Each note became a hurdle, each performance a test. He'd grit his teeth, push through, and by sheer force of will make the sound come out. But it felt forced, unnatural. The day of the opening night arrived, bringing with it a whirlwind of photographers, journalists, and a palpable excitement that vibrated through the entire hotel. Elvis tried to project confidence, to embody the king. He put on his most dazzling jumpsuit, his hair perfectly coiffed, his famous sneer ready. Backstage, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Colonel Parker was pacing like a caged tiger, barking. "Last-minute instructions!" The band members were buzzing with adrenaline. Elvis stood in front of his mirror, staring at his reflection. He looked like Elvis Presley, the king. But his eyes held a flicker of something else, a deep, almost primal fear. He felt the familiar tightness in his throat. Sharper tonight. He swallowed, trying to dislodge it. His hands trembled slightly. Closed his eyes for a moment, trying to breathe, to calm the frantic beating of his heart. He pictured the psychic, her calm, knowing gaze. A silence will fall, a profound and chilling stillness. Elvis, 5 minutes. Parker's booming voice cut through his thoughts. He opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and forced himself to smile. "All right, Colonel." He walked towards the stage, the roar of the crowd already reaching him, a tidal wave of adoration. This was it. The biggest night of his career. He had to be brilliant. He had to conquer this creeping fear. As the lights dimmed and the opening chords of his signature song filled the colossal showroom, Elvis stepped into the spotlight, the king ready to reclaim his throne. He opened his mouth, and the familiar, powerful melody flowed out. For a few moments, everything felt normal. The fear receded. He was Elvis. The psychic's words still echoed, faint but persistent, beneath the thunderous applause. The voice, "A silence will fall." The roar of the crowd was deafening, a wave of pure adoration that washed over Elvis as he launched into his first song. For a brief, glorious moment, all the tension, all the fear melted away. He was home. He was the king. His voice, for those first few minutes, felt strong, vibrant, just as it always had been. He moved with his famous swagger, dazzling the audience with his energy and charisma. He glided through the first few songs, hitting every note with precision, soaking in the thunderous applause. The tightness in his throat was still there, but it felt distant, manageable. He was in his element, living out the dream. Then came the ballad. It was a powerful, emotional song, one that required incredible vocal control and range. It was a crowd favorite, a moment where Elvis could truly connect with his audience on a deeper level. His voice soaring with passion and vulnerability, the orchestra swelled, the strings aching with the melody. Elvis closed his eyes, pouring his heart into the lyrics. He was building towards the crescendo, a high, sustained note that was the emotional peak of the song. He took a deep breath, prepared to unleash the full power of his voice. He opened his mouth, and nothing. For a terrifying, agonizing microsecond, no sound came out. His breath caught. His eyes flew open, wide with panic. He tried again, pushing, forcing the air from his lungs. A weak, reedy whisper emerged, thin and strained, utterly devoid of the rich, powerful tone that was his trademark. It was a pathetic, dying gasp of a sound. Nothing like the soaring note it should have been. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, heads tilted. Whispers started hammered against his ribs. Shame, confusion, and a paralyzing terror washed over him. He tried to recover, to sing the next line, but his voice cracked, splintered into a million pieces. It was like trying to draw water from a dry well. Coughed, trying to clear his throat. But it made no difference. The sound that came out was raw, raspy, and completely unrecognizable as his own. The music faltered. The orchestra, confused, began to slow. The dancers hesitated. The spotlight, which moments before had felt like a warm embrace, now felt like a searing, accusatory beam. The silence that followed was not just the absence of his voice. It was a profound, chilling stillness that descended upon the vast showroom. It was the silence the psychic had warned him about. Not just the physical lack of sound, but a silence that echoed in his very soul, signifying a terrible, horrifying loss. He stood frozen, sweat trickling down his temples, his mind racing, trying to comprehend what was happening. He opened his mouth again, desperate to produce the sound, to prove to himself, to them, that he was still the king. He strained, his throat aching, but only a strangled, pathetic croak emerged. The audience, usually so boisterous and adoring, was now hushed, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Some whispered, others stared openly. He could feel their eyes, a million tiny pinpricks of judgment and pity. Colonel Parker, usually unflappable, rushed onto the stage, his face pale with alarm. Put a hand on Elvis's shoulder, whispering urgently, "What's going on, Elvis? You okay?" Elvis could only shake his head, tears of humiliation and despair welling in his eyes. He tried to speak, but even his speaking voice was raspy, barely audible. I can't," he croaked, his voice breaking. The show was abruptly cut short. The house lights came up. The audience, still stunned, slowly began to filter out the whispers, growing louder, more speculative. Elvis was led off stage, his legs feeling like jelly. The roar of the crowd had been replaced by the haunting echo of silence, and the chilling realization that the psychic's terrifying prophecy had just come true. His voice, the very thing that defined him, had betrayed him. The king was silent, and in that silence he felt utterly, terrifyingly lost. The hours and days following that catastrophic night in Las Vegas were a blur of despair and panic. Elvis was immediately rushed back to his hotel suite, followed by a frantic Colonel Parker and a worried Priscilla. The hotel doctor was called. Then, a series of specialists they poked. Elvis was always the same. Nothing. Physically, his vocal cords were fine. There were no polyps, no nodules, no signs of strain or infection that would explain the complete, sudden loss of his singing voice. His speaking voice was hoarse, a little shaky, but mostly functional. But when he tried to sing even a simple note, nothing but a thin, reedy whisper or strangled croak emerged. It was as if the connection between his brain and his vocal cords, the ability to control and produce musical sound, had simply vanished. The media went wild. Headlines screamed, "King silenced. Elvis loses his voice. Is this the end of Presley's reign?" Speculation ran rampant. Drugs, exhaustion, a breakdown. The shame and humiliation were almost unbearable. He flew back to Graceland, locking himself away in his bedroom, refusing to see anyone but Priscilla. The grand, beautiful mansion, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a gilded prison. Every object, every photograph, every gold record served as a painful reminder of what he had lost. He couldn't sleep. When he did, he was tormented by nightmares of standing on stage, silent while the audience pointed and laughed. He stopped eating, his once vibrant energy replaced by a listlessness that worried Priscilla deeply. Colonel Parker, usually so boisterous, was subdued, though his concern was mostly for the financial implications. He paced outside Elvis's closed door, trying to coax him out, offering solutions, suggesting new doctors, new strategies. "We'll get through this, Elvis. We'll issue a statement. Say it's a temporary illness. You just need to get your voice back." But Elvis knew it wasn't just a temporary illness. He remembered the psychic's words with terrifying clarity. "A silence will fall, a profound and chilling stillness. When it comes, find the song within, not the sound without. Or you will be lost." He was lost. Utterly, completely lost. He tried to sing, alone in his room, day after day. He'd stand in front of the mirror, pick up his guitar, and open his mouth. But no matter how hard he tried, no matter how much he strained, the powerful melodic voice that had captivated millions was gone. It was replaced by emptiness, a void where music used to be. Priscilla tried everything. She brought him his favorite foods, played his old records, which only made him wince, and sat with him for hours, talking gently, trying to pull him out of his despair. "It's okay, Elvis," she'd say, her voice soft and comforting. "We'll figure this out. You're more than just your voice. You're more than just the king." But he couldn't believe her. His voice was him. It was his identity, his purpose, his reason for being. He wasn't Elvis Presley. He was just a man, a broken shell of his former self. The profound silence the psychic had foretold had truly fallen. It wasn't just the absence of his singing voice, but the absence of joy, of purpose, of hope. The silence resonated in the grand halls of Graceland, in the once vibrant rooms that now felt like a tomb. He was living the terrifying reality of the warning, and he had no idea how to find the song within. All he heard was the echo of his own despair. Elvis remained secluded at Graceland, a ghost in his own home. The despair deepened, clinging to him like a shroud. Priscilla's heart ached for him. She tried everything. Gentle persuasion, old friends visiting, even bringing their daughter Lisa Marie to try and cheer him. Nothing worked. He was a shell, unresponsive, lost in the terrifying silence that had fallen over his life. Colonel Parker continued his relentless phone calls, suggesting PR stunts, guest appearances where Elvis wouldn't have to sing anything to keep the Presley name in the public eye. But Elvis refused the very thought of facing the world without his voice, a fresh stab of pain. One quiet afternoon, Priscilla was sorting through the mountain of fan mail that still arrived daily. Most of it was concerned sympathetic or speculative, but one letter, simple and handwritten, caught her eye. It was from a woman named Amelia who worked at a small, local music therapy clinic. "Perhaps if you ever feel ready, you might consider visiting our clinic. We believe this song is within everyone, waiting to be found, no matter the circumstances." Priscilla read the letter aloud to Elvis. He barely reacted, staring blankly ahead. "Music therapy?" he rasped, his voice still rough from disuse. "What good would that do? I can't sing." "It's not just about singing, Elvis," Priscilla urged gently. "It's about connecting with music in a different way. Please, just think about it. It's not about performing. It's about healing." He was resistant, but Priscilla was persistent. Finally, after weeks of gentle coaxing, he agreed just to get her to stop. "Fine," he mumbled, "but I'm not singing. Don't expect a miracle." The clinic was nothing like the grand stages and lavish studios he was used to. It was a small, unassuming building, filled with the quiet hum of activity and the soft sounds of various instruments. No flashing lights, no screaming fans, just a peaceful, almost humble. "Atpor," she greeted him with a calm, steady gaze, her eyes kind but perceptive. She seemed to understand his pain without needing it, explained. "Welcome, Mr. Presley," she said, her voice soft. "There's no pressure here, just a space to be with music, whatever that means. For you..." She led him to a room filled with various instruments. Guitars, pianos, drums, shakers, even some simple percussive instruments he didn't recognize. She sat down at a piano, her fingers gently touching the keys. "Sometimes," she began, "when the sound we expect isn't there, we need to listen differently. Not with our ears, but with our hearts." She played a simple, melancholic melody. "Music is everywhere, even in silence. The rhythm of your breath, the beat of your heart, that's music. The emotions you feel, those are a kind of song." Elvis remained silent, arms crossed, still skeptical. He looked at the instruments with a mixture of longing and bitterness. How could he touch them when the very essence of his musical soul felt gone? Amelia didn't push him. She simply continued to play, inviting him into the quiet space of the music. After a while, she picked up an acoustic guitar and placed it gently in his lap. "You don't have to sing," she said. "Just feel the wood, the strings. Let your fingers remember." He hesitated. Then slowly, reluctantly, his fingers curled around a familiar fretboard. The cold metal of the strings felt strange, yet comforting. He strummed a tentative chord. It sounded fragile. But it was a sound, a quiet, on a sound, a quiet, on a sound. But as the gentle notes vibrated through his hands, a tiny glimmer, a faint flicker of light, began to pierce the suffocating darkness of his despair. For the first time in months, Elvis felt something other than silence. He felt a faint, almost forgotten connection to the very thing that had always sustained him. Music. The journey back was long, but perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't impossible. The first few sessions at the music therapy clinic were slow, almost painfully so. Elvis remained withdrawn, his face often a mask of deep sadness. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was still rough, a shadow of its former glory. Amelia never pushed him to sing. Instead, she encouraged him to explore music in other ways. She'd play the piano and invite him to tap along with a simple drum, or she'd hand him a set of chimes, encouraging him to create his own melodies. He was hesitant at first, his movements stiff and self-conscious. He missed the powerful roar of his own voice, the way it filled the room. These quiet, tentative sounds felt small, insignificant, but slowly something began to shift. He started spending more time with the guitar. He couldn't sing along, but his fingers remembered the chords, the intricate finger-picking patterns. He'd play old gospel hymns, the ones his mother used to sing, and folk tunes, the raw, simple melodies that predated his rock and roll fame. He found a quiet comfort in the vibrations of the wood against his chest, the pure, unadorned sound of the instrument. Amelia would sit with him sometimes playing along softly, sometimes just listening. She talked about how music was a language, a way to express feelings that words couldn't capture. "Your voice isn't just your vocal cords, Elvis," she'd explain gently. "It's your soul, your heart, and that part of you still sings, even if no sound comes out." One day she brought out a stack of blank music sheets and a pen. "Try writing," she suggested. "Just put down whatever comes to mind, whatever you feel. It doesn't have to rhyme, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just let it out." Elvis stared at the blank page, feeling a surge of frustration. How could he write a song if he couldn't hear it, couldn't sing it? Then an image flickered in his mind. The Vegas stage, the silence, the terror, and underneath it, the steady, unwavering love in Priscilla's eyes. Picked up the pen, and slowly, awkwardly, words began to flow. He wrote about the darkness, the feeling of being lost. But then, almost unconsciously, he started writing about the glimpses of light, the quiet comfort of music. Without the pressure, the surprising peace he found in simply playing a chord. He wrote about Priscilla, about his daughter, about the simple beauty of a sunrise over Graceland. He wasn't writing hits, he was writing his truth, and it felt liberating. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was creating something, not just performing someone else's song. Amelia also encouraged him to observe the other patients at the clinic. There were children with developmental challenges who found joy in banging a drum, elderly people with memory loss who brightened at a familiar melody, and others struggling with various forms of pain, finding solace in rhythm. He'd patiently show a child how to hold a guitar pick or gently guide an elderly woman's hand across a keyboard. He'd listen to their struggles, their quiet triumphs. And in helping them find their own song within, he began to hear his own in a way he never had before. His physical voice, too, began to change. He wasn't pushing it, not forcing it. He'd hum softly while playing the guitar. A low, gentle rumble, sometimes a melody, which surfaced light and airy. It wasn't the powerful, booming voice of Elvis the King, but it was his voice. Softer, yes, but also warmer, more vulnerable, more authentic. It was the sound of a man slowly, carefully putting himself back together. He started smiling, more a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He spent more time with Priscilla and Lisa Marie, truly present, not just physically there. He was still Elvis, but he was also something more, something different. He was finding his song, not in the roar of the crowd, but in the quiet, healing space of his own heart. The terror of the silence had been immense, but it had also paradoxically created the space for a new kind of music to emerge. As Elvis continued his sessions at the clinic, a profound realization began to dawn on him. The psychic's warning, find the song within, not the sound without, wasn't just about recovering his singing voice. It was about something much deeper. It was about rediscovering his authentic self, the man beneath the legend, the artist beyond the performer. He had always defined himself by his voice, by the roar of the crowds, by the adulation. When that external sound was taken away, he had felt utterly empty, believing he had lost everything. But now, in the quiet halls of the music therapy clinic, surrounded by people who didn't care if he was the king, he was learning that his true song wasn't about fame or power. It was about connection, expression, and the pure, unadulterated joy of music itself. His physical voice continued to heal, not in a miraculous return to its former power, but in a gradual softening, a gentle reclaiming. He found he could hum, then sing short, simple phrases, usually gospel or blues tunes that resonated with his soul. His voice was lower, richer, less about raw power, and more about warmth and emotion. It felt honest. He spent hours at the piano, not practicing for a show, but simply playing for himself, letting the melodies flow. He discovered a new appreciation for the simple beauty of chords, the way different notes harmonized. He began to write more, not just lyrics, but complete songs, humming the melodies softly to himself. These weren't rock anthems. They were soulful ballads, reflections on life, love and loss, imbued with a newfound depth. He also found immense satisfaction in helping others at the clinic. He'd listen patiently to an elderly veteran play a shaky harmonica, offering encouragement in a gentle word. He'd sing soft lullabies to a child with autism, watching as their eyes lit up with recognition and comfort. He didn't need to be Elvis Presley, the superstar, to make a difference. He just needed to be Elvis, the man who loved music and loved people. Priscilla witnessed this transformation with a mix of relief and awe. The haunted look in his eyes had faded, replaced by a quiet contentment. He was more present, more engaged with their life at Graceland. He'd sit on the floor and play his guitar for Lisa Marie, singing soft, silly songs he made up on the spot, and his daughter would giggle, completely oblivious to his former fame or vocal struggles. Colonel Parker, of course, was still pushing. Elvis, the public is clamoring. We need to make a comeback, a new album, a new tour. We can re-record your old hits with a softer sound. Elvis would listen patiently, but his responses were different. Now, Colonel, he'd say calmly but firmly, I appreciate your concern, but my music is changing, and so am I. I'm not sure I want to go back to the way things were, Parker would sputter, unable to comprehend this shift. But Elvis was no longer afraid of disappointing him or anyone else. Terrifying silence had stripped away everything external, forcing him to look inward. And what he found there was a voice that was truer, more powerful than any screaming crowd could ever validate. He realized the gilded cage the psychic had mentioned wasn't just his fame. It was his own perception of himself, his reliance on his external persona. The key to his freedom was not in regaining his old voice, but in letting go of the need for it. The song within was his authentic self, the quiet, soulful music he had always carried, now finally able to breathe without the immense pressure of being Elvis the King. He was learning to be free. Months turned into a year. Elvis had found a new rhythm to his life. He still loved Graceland, but it no longer felt like a prison. He divided his time between his family, his quiet musical exploration, and regular visits to the music therapy clinic. Not just as a patient, but as a volunteer. The news of his vocal struggles had largely faded from the headlines, replaced by new celebrity gossip. Most people assumed Elvis had simply retired, perhaps lost his magic. Colonel Parker still tried to schedule massive comeback tours, but Elvis politely yet firmly declined. He was healing, growing, and the thought of returning to the relentless machine of superstardom held no appeal. One afternoon, Amelia approached him at the clinic. Elvis, she said, her eyes twinkling, we're holding our annual charity concert to raise funds for the clinic. It's small, just for local families and supporters. We'd love for you to, participate in any way you feel comfortable. Elvis felt a familiar flicker of fear. A performance on stage. Even if it was small, it was still a stage. The memory of that night in Vegas, the terrifying silence, still haunted him. He hadn't sung for a crowd since. He hesitated, looking out the window at the quiet tree-lined street. I don't know, Amelia. My voice it's not what it was. It doesn't need to be, she replied softly. Just needs to be your voice, the one you found, the one that tells your truth. She paused. And imagine the good you could do for the clinic. For these kids, your presence alone would mean the world. He thought of a little boy he taught to play the ukulele, the elderly woman who smiled for the first time in weeks when he played her a simple blues tune. He thought of the deep satisfaction he now found in helping others, a feeling far richer than any applause he'd ever received. Okay, he finally said, a tremor in his voice, but a newfound resolve in his eyes. Okay, I'll do it. The night of the charity concert arrived. It was held in a modest community hall decorated with handmade banners and twinkling fairy lights. There were no flashing cameras, no screaming mobs, just a few hundred people. Families, friends, and supporters of the clinic backstage. Elvis felt the nerves, but they were different this time. Not the paralyzing dread of before, but a quieter anxiety. Priscilla was there holding his hand, offering a comforting smile. Colonel Parker was conspicuously absent, having washed his hands of what he considered a small-time gig. Amelia introduced him. "Tonight, we have a very special guest, a friend of our clinic, who has found a new way to share his extraordinary gift of music. Please welcome Elvis." The applause was warm, genuine, not thunderous. Elvis walked onto the small stage dressed simply, not in a flamboyant jumpsuit, but in a smart suit. He carried an acoustic guitar. The spotlight was soft, intimate. He sat down on a stool, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the faces in the audience. They weren't demanding anything from him. They were just listening. He took a deep breath. "Good evening," he said, his speaking voice a little deeper, more resonant now. "It's been a while since I've been on a stage, and I want to thank Amelia and this wonderful clinic for giving me a chance to reconnect with music." He paused, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. "I'm not going to be singing any of the old hits tonight. My voice, it's changed, but the song in my heart is louder than ever." He began to play a simple, soulful melody on his acoustic guitar. Then he started to sing. It wasn't a belted-out ballad, but a quiet, heartfelt gospel tune he had loved since childhood. His voice was not the king's voice, not the one that shattered records and shook stadiums. It was softer, yes, but also incredibly rich, imbued with a raw vulnerability and a profound depth that moved the audience. Every note was pure, every word sincere. He wasn't performing, he was sharing. He sang another song, one he had written himself during his healing journey, a simple melody about finding light in darkness, about the quiet strength of the human spirit. Tears welled in the eyes of many in the audience, not because they were seeing a legend, but because they were hearing a soul. When he finished, there was a hushed silence, then an eruption of applause. It wasn't the roar of millions, but it was a standing ovation filled with warmth, respect, and deep admiration. Elvis stood, looked out at the faces, and for the first time in years truly felt at peace on a stage. He had faced his greatest fear, embraced the change, and found a different, more powerful way to make his song heard. The small charity concert became a turning point for Elvis. The experience of sharing his newly discovered voice, not for fame or fortune, but for connection and purpose, had been profoundly liberating. He realized the psychic's warning had been a painful but necessary gift. The terrifying silence had forced him to shed the external layers, to confront his deepest fears, and to ultimately find a more authentic, fulfilling version of himself. He continued to make music, but on his own terms. He built a small, intimate studio at Graceland, where he could record whenever inspiration struck without the pressure of deadlines or producers. His new music was different, more soulful, more introspective, drawing heavily from gospel, blues, and folk influences. It wasn't about charts or platinum records. It was about expression, about sharing the song that truly came from within. He also remained deeply involved with the music therapy clinic, becoming a quiet, unofficial patron. He'd drop in regularly, not as a celebrity, but as a friend and fellow music lover. He'd play guitar for the patients, listen to their stories, and offer encouragement. He found immense joy in seeing the drudging power of music in their lives, a joy far surpassing any fleeting thrill of fame. Colonel Parker, after initially despairing, eventually adapted. He learned to respect Elvis's boundaries, though he still occasionally pitched sensible comeback ideas. But Elvis was no longer controlled by the machine. He chose his own path. He did a few select, intimate performances for charity. Events never large concerts, always acoustic and heartfelt. These rare appearances were met with profound emotional responses, From fans who understood that they were witnessing something deeper than just a show, they were witnessing a man who had faced his greatest fear and found a new, more profound truth. She had stood by him through his darkest despair, and now they shared a bond forged in adversity. They had more quiet moments, more genuine conversations, their lives less consumed by the relentless demands of his career. He was a more present father to Lisa Marie, playing with her, teaching her simple chords on the guitar. His voice soft but full of love. Elvis finally understood the psychic's words. Fully, the gilded cage was not Graceland, but his own perception of his identity tied solely to his voice and fame. The greatest joy that became his greatest sorrow was indeed his magnificent voice, because its loss plunged him into terrifying darkness. But the key to his freedom was lost in plain sight. It was the music within him, the pure, unadulterated passion for sound and expression that existed even without the booming voice, waiting to be rediscovered. He realized that true happiness wasn't in being the king, but in being Elvis, a man who loved music, who could connect with others, who found peace in the simple act of creating and sharing. He wasn't the same Elvis Presley who had walked onto that Vegas stage years ago. He was better, richer, deeper, more authentic. The terrifying warning had indeed come true, but it hadn't destroyed him. It had paradoxically saved him. It had stripped away the superficial, leaving only the essential. And in that raw, vulnerable space, Elvis Presley found his true voice, a song that resonated not just in his throat, but in his very soul, a heartwarming melody of peace, purpose, and profound contentment. King had found his true kingdom, not on a stage, but within his own heart, where the music played on beautiful and free